Hey guys, tonight we are going to unearth the secrets of the Vikings who never came home, those who vanished over far horizons, traded away their roots, or simply disappeared beyond the edge of a map. You can almost taste the salt of the fjord air tonight, drifting through the sagas and carrying news of men who once swore they'd return. But, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this journey any better than they did if you dared to follow in their boots. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and please post your location and local time in the comments so we can all travel together, even across centuries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a shoreline beaten gray by centuries of wind, imagining the footsteps that pressed into this same gritty strand 1,000 years ago. Their names might be lost, but their urge to roam feels as sharp as a sudden squall. You picture them, a young man tightening the sealskin straps on a sea chest, a seasoned warrior counting the last iron rivets in the prow, a merchant packing up amber beads to barter far from home. They stepped forward full of plans, sure they would return, carrying glory or gold. But many never did. The Viking Age was built on movement. That part you know already. Ships cutting open rivers, knifing through waves, sails full of wind and raw ambition. But what might surprise you is that some of these men and women never even planned to come back. For them, the great push outward was not about a quick raid or a trade circuit. It was about finding a life somewhere else entirely. Historians still argue whether these first emigrants meant to sever their roots or just fell in love with distant lands. But their tracks run deep, from Russia to Ireland to the edges of the Byzantine Empire. That sense of restless possibility was baked into the Viking spirit. The same boldness that made them swing axes also made them pack up families, forge alliances, and start over in places where their names would be impossible to pronounce. One mainstream fact that can ground us is that Iceland itself was a Viking colony begun by settlers leaving Norway not for riches, but for independence. And maybe a bit of elbow room away from a pushy king. The same impulse repeated itself all across the Viking world. You can almost hear their dreams rattling across the ocean, more powerful than any chain. There's something a bit tragic, too, in these wanderers who never found their way home. You imagine the old parents left behind, staring out over a fjord that reflected no returning sail, or the stone farms falling apart for lack of sons to fix their roofs. Maybe these Viking souls meant to write home, but words dissolve like fish bones in the brine. Sometimes a hush grows so wide that no message can cross it. Your boots crunch along a rough path now, one you swear holds the echoes of footsteps from men who vanished. They might have signed up for a raid and decided to stay for good, building new homesteads, switching sides, even taking local lovers. Or they might have been lost at sea, sails shredded by storms, and swallowed so completely no rune ever marked their bones. That is the hard price of courage, after all. Not every risk has a return ticket. There's a fringe tidbit that still makes historians raise an eyebrow. Some sagas suggest certain Vikings willingly vanished to escape family feuds or debts, using the open world as their witness protection program. If you were deep in trouble back in Hedeby, it wasn't the worst idea to catch a ship to Frankish lands, change your name, and never look over your shoulder again. And hey, that's one way to dodge your ex too. Just take a dragon-headed fairy and ghost them Viking style. The funny thing is how those who left still shape the places they left behind. A village missing half its young warriors, that village changes. A kingdom that loses its best shipwrights to another coast, it has to adapt, even grow cautious. Over time, the home communities became a little more protective, a little more organized, trying to hold on to what was left. Like a tree growing around an old wound, you can see those patterns even now in place names and clan memories. And yes, if you're wondering, the people who stayed behind told stories about those gone souls. Some were heroes who'd surely return with glittering loot. Others turned into cautionary tales, the fool who went abroad and died choking on foreign bread. The Vikings had no illusions about how risky travel could be. Their songs still carried the sense that once you stepped off home soil, you belonged more to the gods than to your own mother. Your mind drifts a little, picturing the ships setting off by the dozens, each one stuffed with dreams, rage, and a bit of homesickness folded up with the bread. Some would make it back. But the rest? Their stories are scattered like spilled beads across a world map. If you listen closely tonight, you can almost hear them, those lost voices on a midnight wind, still trying to make their way home. You step away from the echo of those lost souls and slip forward in time, deeper into the haze of forgotten routes and surprising second chances. Imagine you're walking through a Viking market, maybe on the shores of Hedeby or Birka, and you notice a trader carefully bundling up furs, iron tools, beads, even walrus ivory. His eyes flicker with a plan much bigger than a simple seasonal exchange. He's thinking of setting up shop far from home. You can practically see the dream glinting behind his weather-roughened face. Some Vikings, believe it or not, never aimed to return because they didn't come to raid or rule. They came to stay. It's almost comical how history paints them only as screaming berserkers, smashing up monasteries. But if you peel away the blood and battle songs, you find merchants with deep pockets and a nose for new opportunities. They carried scales to weigh silver, smooth words for haggling, and a willingness to slip into local custom like a second skin. Historians still argue whether these merchants planned permanent migration from the very start, or whether they decided only after sampling the local honey and hospitality. But the end result was the same. They stayed. One mainstream fact that anchors this is the Viking presence in Dublin, which eventually became one of the strongest Norse trading hubs outside Scandinavia. They didn't just pass through. They built houses, raised children, and even minted coins with their own designs. Dublin was a Viking town in every sense. Its heartbeat changed forever by settlers who chose to stay, rather than risk the long trip home. As you move past a row of market stalls in your mind's eye, you catch a glimpse of fringe stories that are even stranger. Some merchants are rumored to have blended so thoroughly with local cultures that after a generation or two, their grandchildren didn't even know where their grandfathers came from. Maybe they still sang a few Norse songs, but their language shifted, their clothes changed, and their children grew up rooting for local kings instead of distant jarls. Kind of like when you get so comfortable at a friend's house that you forget your own kitchen, right? You lean against a timber doorway and let the clamor of trade swirl around you. There is saffron from the east, glimmering Baltic amber, polished walrus tusks, even delicate silks torn from the Silk Road's outermost edges. These goods flowed through Viking hands and left a trail of settlement behind them. Some of these men married local women, inheriting land and making alliances that turned their children into power brokers. And sure, some still carved runes into house beams or wore Thor's hammer around their necks. But you can feel how they blended, adapting so easily it's almost eerie. The merchants who became settlers stand in sharp contrast to the men who were out for a single raid and return. You can practically sense how their minds worked differently, not calculating the fastest escape route, but rather scoping out which patch of land had the best soil or which village needed a new blacksmith. These were the ones who signed up for a life away from frostbitten fjords for a new story. And they wrote that story with coins, with trade pacts, with marriages, all under a foreign sky. There's an undeniable ache woven through these journeys. You wonder if they ever miss the smell of salt spray on their own coasts, or the rush of winter storms barreling through Norway. Or maybe their new homes offered something gentler, softer weather, sweeter grain, a bit more sunlight, or just the sense that they could finally breathe without a chieftain's demands pressing on their chest. Historians still argue whether these settlers held on to the dream of returning until their dying day, or if they burned that bridge gladly and never looked back. Some of the most powerful trade settlements in Viking lore were built by men who never saw their home harbors again. You picture those settlements as you stroll along the edge of the market, the smell of smoked fish mixing with wet wool and crushed herbs. There is talk in the air of prices, of alliances, of danger on the next ship arriving. No one here seems to regret staying. Their children speak two tongues, their neighbors trust them, and their presence reshapes the future, one coin at a time.
A quirky detail you can almost laugh at is how some of these merchants sent letters back to their old villages, bragging about how wonderful their new towns were, while leaving out all the bits about plague, bad winters, or angry neighbors with axes. Some things, it seems, never change. You can practically picture an Instagram feed of the Viking Age, photos of the best feast, but no pictures of the rats in the basement. Still, those merchants made a new life. They changed Europe, one silver scale at a time. They left their mark in place, names, shipwrecks, scattered runestones, and the DNA of modern people who might have no clue their family tree had a beard and a ship in it. So you stand in the hush between stalls, hearing the soft calls of traders arranging their next adventure, knowing some of them will never step back onto Scandinavian soil. The land they left behind was poorer for their loss, but the world was richer for their courage. You wander away from the jangle of coins and merchant chatter, letting your thoughts drift to a different group of Vikings, the warriors who set out across dangerous seas and simply vanished. These are the ones who never came home because their stories ended somewhere cold and silent, beyond the help of friends or family. The sagas rarely mention these missing souls except in a single mournful verse, but you can feel their shadows pressing against the corners of Viking memory, waiting to be named. Hey, you might think Viking warriors were unstoppable because they wore mail shirts and carried axes the size of your torso, but reality was far less heroic. For every band of fighters who came swaggering home with stolen treasure, there were dozens who fell in bogs, froze on a glacier, or found themselves hacked to pieces on a battlefield far from help. Historians still argue whether Viking chieftains even cared about recovering these bodies, or if the men were left behind as a grim warning to the next band of raiders. There was no helicopter rescue, no heroic retrieval mission. You slipped off the map, and that was that. One plain historical fact is that mass graves from places like Repton in England show how many Norsemen died on campaign, too far from any ship that could carry them home. Picture the scene. Waterlogged fields churning with mud and blood, ravens circling overhead, the cries of the wounded lost in a choking fog. These men had no chance to say goodbye, no proper rites, no loved ones to weep over their bones. They became ghosts in a foreign land, and their kin simply had to accept the silence. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders as if you can feel that same wet chill sinking into your bones. Maybe you imagine these warriors lying beneath damp English soil, their shields rotting away, their swords rusting uselessly beside them, a few coins in their mouths to pay some local ferryman, if they were lucky. If not, well, the earth took them, and their names faded with each passing winter. You wonder how many parents or wives back in Norway stood on a headland, scanning the sea, hoping their sons would appear on the horizon until hope gave out. It hits you hard, even through the centuries. Some fringe scholars have claimed that a few of these vanished Vikings actually changed their names and defected, joining up with local armies to survive. Maybe they fought for a Saxon lord, or an Irish chieftain, switching sides for a warm hearth and a steady meal. It's a wild idea, but stranger things have happened. After all, if you've lost your ship and half your friends, what's left except your own skin and the will to keep breathing? But historians still argue whether that was rare or surprisingly common, whether these so-called fearless warriors had enough fear to change allegiance and vanish into a new identity. In the glow of the evening fire, you can almost hear a Sagaman telling the tale of a lost champion who never came back. The story grows with each retelling. Maybe he was cursed, maybe he was betrayed, maybe the gods themselves dragged him down for pride. But behind the drama lies a simpler truth. So many just never made it home. Their mothers and sisters kept weaving cloth year after year, never knowing where to lay a stone for their sons. There's something heartbreakingly universal about that, right? A hope that will not die even as the years grind on. And it wasn't only England's muddy fields swallowing these warriors. Some were lost along river routes into the Slavic lands, trying to carve a trade empire along the twisting, unforgiving waterways. Their longships cracked on hidden shoals, or they were ambushed on a forest trail, never to see the fjords again. The Dnieper and the Volga hold secrets still, clutching the bones of men who gambled on a new horizon and lost. A chunk of wood from a shield might wash ashore, but the man who held it was gone for good. You pause, letting the silence deepen. Then imagine how the families tried to honor those missing sons anyway. Maybe they held a symbolic funeral, burning a carved wooden boat with the man's name etched on it, hoping the smoke would carry his spirit home. There's something deeply human about needing to put a story to an empty place at the dinner table. Even the bravest Viking couldn't fight the gnawing ache of loss. That makes you respect their courage all the more, heading off into the unknown, knowing you might be one of those who never saw the green hills of home again. And if you think the modern world is better at tracking the missing, think again. Sometimes the difference between a Viking mother waiting on the rocks and someone today refreshing an airline app to check if a loved one's plane arrived isn't all that big. That same hush, that same dread, it never quite leaves you. You share that feeling across 1,000 years, like a thin red thread running through your spine. So you close your eyes and picture those warriors, not in glory, not swinging axes under a blood-red banner, but standing alone on a distant shore, the taste of sea salt still on their lips, wondering if they'd ever see the dark ridges of their homeland again. And then they vanish, like a candle snuffed in the wind, leaving behind only the faintest trail of their dreams, buried under the weight of foreign soil. Your boots crunch over frosted grass as you move deeper into the story, your mind clinging to the faces of those who never came home. They weren't all warriors, you realize. Plenty of Vikings vanished in search of trade rather than glory. Imagine a group of teenage boys, restless and bright-eyed, signing on to a merchant crew headed for the Black Sea. They packed up cheap furs, bits of amber, and stories about how they'd come back rich beyond anyone's dreams. But a winter storm or a bandit ambush could erase them before the next spring even began. They just stopped existing, and that's a hard truth to swallow. Some families held fast to a belief that the sea would spit their loved ones back, no matter how long it took. And sure, a few drifters did eventually crawl ashore years later, thinner and stranger than before, speaking a handful of foreign words, half forgotten. But most never returned. Historians still argue whether these missing traders really mattered to their home communities or if their places were quickly filled by eager replacements, eager to chase the same risky dream. That feels almost too cold, but there's a grain of truth to it. Life went on. Harvests had to be brought in. Raids had to be planned. Neighbors still quarreled over grazing land. One mainstream historical fact is that Vikings were phenomenal traders, sometimes even better than they were raiders. Evidence from Burka, Hedeby, and Kiev shows a trading web so wide it boggles the modern mind. Spices, silk, coins, even glass beads crossed thousands of miles, linking Europe with the Middle East and beyond. These networks needed warm bodies to run them, young men willing to sign on and sail, even if that meant they might vanish somewhere between the Caspian Sea and the forests of Rus. It's as if the horizon itself kept gobbling them up, one by one. You picture one such boy now, no older than 16, clutching a purse of rough-minted silver, proud of the arm ring his father gave him. He's got dreams of Constantinople in his head, glittering gold domes, spicy air, horses decked in jewels. He leaves behind a mother who weeps in private, a brother who tries to act tough, a dog that never stops watching the doorway. You can feel that heartbreak rise, slow and sour like a swallowed sob. Maybe he never made it past the first big river port. Maybe a fever took him, or he was robbed for his coins and his boots. And the family? They would never know. Sometimes you wonder if it was easier to imagine him living among foreigners than to picture him buried in a shallow, unmarked grave. There's a curious sort of comfort in thinking he built a new life instead of dying young. That's where folklore comes in, feeding the notion that lost sons became kings in faraway lands, or fell in love with a princess, or learned magic from a distant sage. People had to build those stories to stitch up the holes left in their hearts, because the truth was cruel and silent and offered no closure. And let's be honest, we do the same thing today, spinning conspiracies about missing planes or sailors because the human brain just cannot stand a blank space. A fringe tidbit pops up here. Some researchers suggest a handful of Viking traders willingly forgot home, reinventing themselves as locals in Slavic towns, even changing religion to blend in. It's an idea with thin evidence, but an irresistible ring of possibility. After all, if you've lost your trade goods, your crew, and your bearings, why not start over? You can almost hear that 16-year-old boy telling himself, "My mother will never know, but at least I'm alive." Still, historians debate whether that was a rare fluke or a more common survival tactic. Your thoughts settle back on the mothers waiting at doorways, clutching their wooden charms and little bone amulets, praying that some god, any god, would guide their children home. It's the kind of moment that slices straight through time, right? Because loss is loss, whether you're wearing modern jeans or a scratchy Viking tunic. The heartbreak of waiting echoes so painfully familiar you could reach out and touch it. Some evenings, a wandering bard might arrive with news of someone who made it back. A name carried over 1,000 miles of rumor and rumor's rumor. That must have felt like breathing again after holding your lungs shut for a year. A grin through tears, maybe, as the family passed around a new hope that they'd almost let die. And maybe it was true, or maybe the bard embroidered the tale to earn a few extra coins. That sense of uncertainty, of never quite knowing, is what gives these stories their power. It's also what makes them sting. You pause, letting a winter wind catch your hair. There's a chill in it that feels old and honest, like it's seen 1,000 goodbyes. It reminds you that the price of daring to cross an ocean or barter along distant rivers wasn't only measured in coin or glory, but in how many never saw their homeland again. Those forgotten traders, the kids, the dreamers, the reckless, they became a kind of offering to the horizon itself. The sea and the rivers demanded a sacrifice, and they took it, over and over. So you walk on, feeling that truth settle into your chest. Behind every glittering Viking trade route lay a trail of vanished people, bones lost to nameless shores, their families left holding only stories to keep them warm. Maybe that's the real saga, the one nobody wrote down. A saga of the ones who stepped out and didn't come back, whose dreams dissolved in a world that was far bigger and far more dangerous than they'd ever been warned. You pass under a stand of twisted pine, the air sharp with resin, thinking about another reason a Viking might never come home. Plain old bad luck. Raiders and merchants both risked their necks on the seas, and sometimes even the best warrior ended up fish food. Picture this. You sail out with a belly full of smoked lamb, your shield hung proud on the rail, dreams of silver gleaming behind your eyes. Maybe you're heading for Francia or a quick trip to raid Ireland's monasteries. But then a freak storm hits, sails rip, oars snap, and the sea tosses you like a rag doll until you vanish. No marker, no funeral, no word to the folks waiting on the beach. Hey, you probably won't survive this, and neither did many of them. The North Atlantic is no gentle blue pond. Waves can smash your longship apart in one night, and ice can grind your dreams to splinters. Historians still argue whether the average Viking truly grasped how risky those waters were, or whether they just trusted the gods to see them through. It's easy to picture some cocksure young raider shouting to Thor while his ship went down, defiance to the last gulp of seawater. A mainstream historical fact is that the Viking Age saw a huge number of shipwrecks, with archaeologists still finding the bones of longships buried in silt all across northern Europe. The sea ate them, and the sea forgot them. Their families were left to wonder, season after season, whether they had drowned or simply stayed away. And that's a special kind of torture, isn't it? No body, no closure, just endless imagining. The worst part is that the stories don't always match up. You could hear someone swear they saw your cousin alive in Hedeby last summer trading cloth, but then another rumor says he was killed by Franks, or that he went inland and never came back. Truth slips through the fingers like seawater, impossible to hold. So you sit by the fire, chewing on barley bread, asking yourself if your brother will ever walk through the door again. A cruel hope that never quite dies. Some captains, though, were infamous for tempting fate again and again. There's a quirky tidbit about one berserk crew in a saga that bragged about sailing through 3 storms in a single season, losing half their men and still showing up to loot a monastery anyway. You almost have to admire the recklessness, a Viking kind of courage, or maybe just a death wish with style. They must have known that each trip was rolling the dice, and yet they went anyway, because the prize was so sweet. You keep walking, feeling a sting of salt in the air, as if the sea itself is reminding you it takes what it pleases. The North was no place for soft hearts, and even the strongest sailors paid their toll to the waves. A carved dragon prow couldn't fight a rogue wave. The best helmsman couldn't charm a sudden iceberg. And you remember the bones of ships dug up in Roskilde or Skuldelev, still cradling iron nails and lost dreams. It all feels so close you could reach out and touch it, as if the ghosts of those unlucky seafarers are still out there, pacing the beaches they'll never land on again. Historians still debate whether Viking voyages were planned with enough food and fresh water to survive the worst storms. Some argue that many were half mad with hunger by the time they reached shore. Others say these sailors were seasoned enough to plan for anything. The sagas brag about their seamanship, but the real ocean is always hungrier than any saga hero. You pause to breathe, taking in the chill damp, trying to imagine a wife or husband watching the horizon day after day, scanning for sails. The worst fear, of course, was not knowing. Death you could grieve, but vanishing was a knife that twisted deeper every month. Some families kept a place at the table, refusing to call their loved one dead until years had passed. That aching loyalty. It's heartbreak wrapped in faith, and the sagas barely scratch the surface of how hard that waiting must have felt. And there's the cruelty of Viking glory, so much celebration of conquest, so little mention of those lost at sea. They slip out of the story, anonymous and half forgotten, unless someone dragged their name back with a song. But you know they mattered, these unlucky sailors. You can almost see them on their last night alive, warming their hands around a driftwood fire, half scared, half thrilled, pretending not to hear the thunder rolling closer. They laughed too loud, maybe to scare off the fear. You step through the last of the pines, emerging into a marsh where water birds cry in the reeds. The flat gray sky seems to go on forever, like the sea itself, hiding both promise and danger in equal measure. Maybe the ones who never came home still dream of that horizon, still drifting beyond your reach, waiting for someone to tell their story. Maybe you're the one to do it, tracing their ghosts through the hush of the waves, giving them one last chance to be remembered. So you stand there, imagining the splash of a long-forgotten oar, the creak of a ship no one will ever see again, carried away on a tide that never turns back. That's the Viking Age, after all, glorious, savage, and often heartbreakingly lost to the deep. So you go on, carrying their shadows with you, these invisible men with no tombstones who paid for their crimes with silence and snow. No longships, no fair winds, no heroic sagas. Only the fading footprints of the ones who never came home.
You pass under a stand of twisted pine, the air sharp with resin, thinking about another reason a Viking might never come home. Plain old bad luck. Raiders and merchants both risked their necks on the seas, and sometimes even the best warrior ended up fish food. Picture this. You sail out with a belly full of smoked lamb, your shield hung proud on the rail, dreams of silver gleaming behind your eyes. Maybe you're heading for Francia or a quick trip to raid Ireland's monasteries. But then a freak storm hits, sails rip, oars snap, and the sea tosses you like a rag doll until you vanish. No marker, no funeral, no word to the folks waiting on the beach. Hey, you probably won't survive this, and neither did many of them. The North Atlantic is no gentle blue pond. Waves can smash your longship apart in one night, and ice can grind your dreams to splinters. Historians still argue whether the average Viking truly grasped how risky those waters were, or whether they just trusted the gods to see them through. It's easy to picture some cocksure young raider shouting to Thor while his ship went down, defiance to the last gulp of seawater. A mainstream historical fact is that the Viking Age saw a huge number of shipwrecks, with archaeologists still finding the bones of longships buried in silt all across northern Europe. The sea ate them, and the sea forgot them. Their families were left to wonder, season after season, whether they had drowned or simply stayed away. And that's a special kind of torture, isn't it? No body, no closure, just endless imagining. The worst part is that the stories don't always match up. You could hear someone swear they saw your cousin alive in Hedeby last summer, trading cloth, but then another rumor says he was killed by Franks, or that he went inland and never came back. Truth slips through the fingers like seawater, impossible to hold. So you sit by the fire, chewing on barley bread, asking yourself if your brother will ever walk through the door again. A cruel hope that never quite dies. Some captains, though, were infamous for tempting fate again and again. There's a quirky tidbit about one berserk crew in a saga that bragged about sailing through 3 storms in a single season, losing half their men and still showing up to loot a monastery anyway. You almost have to admire the recklessness, a Viking kind of courage, or maybe just a death wish with style. They must have known that each trip was rolling the dice, and yet they went anyway because the prize was so sweet. You keep walking, feeling a sting of salt in the air, as if the sea itself is reminding you it takes what it pleases. The North was no place for soft hearts, and even the strongest sailors paid their toll to the waves. A carved dragon prow couldn't fight a rogue wave. The best helmsman couldn't charm a sudden iceberg. And you remember the bones of ships dug up in Roskilde or Skuldelev, still cradling iron nails and lost dreams. It all feels so close you could reach out and touch it, as if the ghosts of those unlucky seafarers are still out there, pacing the beaches they'll never land on again. Historians still debate whether Viking voyages were planned with enough food and fresh water to survive the worst storms. Some argue that many were half mad with hunger by the time they reached shore. Others say these sailors were seasoned enough to plan for anything. The sagas brag about their seamanship, but the real ocean is always hungrier than any saga hero. You pause to breathe, taking in the chill damp, trying to imagine a wife or husband watching the horizon day after day, scanning for sails. The worst fear, of course, was not knowing. Death you could grieve, but vanishing was a knife that twisted deeper every month. Some families kept a place at the table, refusing to call their loved one dead until years had passed. That aching loyalty, its heartbreak wrapped in faith, and the sagas barely scratch the surface of how hard that waiting must have felt. And there's the cruelty of Viking glory, so much celebration of conquest, so little mention of those lost at sea. They slip out of the story, anonymous and half-forgotten, unless someone dragged their name back with a song. But you know they mattered, these unlucky sailors. You can almost see them on their last night alive, warming their hands around a driftwood fire, half scared, half thrilled, pretending not to hear the thunder rolling closer. They laugh too loud, maybe, to scare off the fear. You step through the last of the pines, emerging into a marsh where water birds cry in the reeds. The flat gray sky seems to go on forever, like the sea itself, hiding both promise and danger in equal measure. Maybe the ones who never came home still dream of that horizon, still drifting beyond your reach, waiting for someone to tell their story. Maybe you're the one to do it, tracing their ghosts through the hush of the waves, giving them one last chance to be remembered. So you stand there, imagining the splash of a long-forgotten oar, the creak of a ship no one will ever see again, carried away on a tide that never turns back. That's the Viking Age, after all, glorious, savage, and often heartbreakingly lost to the deep. The path winds through a clearing ringed with beech trees, their coppery leaves stirring in a breeze, and you think about those Vikings who simply chose not to come home. Picture a young warrior, maybe barely out of boyhood, with a head full of epic songs and a belly full of ambition. He sails out to raid or to trade, or maybe just to see what was over the next wave. And then he finds something better, a new land, a new love, a new freedom he could never taste back home, weighed down by family expectations, clan debts, or the tangled blood feuds that seem to breed endlessly in the fjords. So, he stays, never sending word, letting his old life vanish behind him. Hey, you probably won't survive this, but at least you'll get a fresh start. That's how it might have felt. The Viking world was never exactly easy on second chances, and some men took their freedom in the boldest way they could, by disappearing. Historians still argue whether these runaway Vikings were truly common or just a rare rebellion, but the sagas are peppered with hints about wanderers who simply made new names for themselves far from home. A mainstream historical fact is that evidence of Viking settlements has turned up everywhere, from the British Isles to Eastern Europe to North Africa, suggesting that plenty of Norsemen found other places to belong. Archaeologists even found Norse-style artifacts deep inland where no return voyage was ever recorded. Maybe a man married into a local tribe. Maybe he traded iron for a quiet plot of farmland. Maybe he just liked the idea of never looking back. The quirky tidbit you'll love is that some sagas speak of Vikings forgetting their tongue, as if, after only a few years abroad, they couldn't even speak their mother language anymore. Can you imagine returning to your childhood village and struggling to say hello? It must have felt like stepping onto alien soil, even if you once called it home. You push forward, boots catching on twisted roots, wondering what drove a Viking to abandon everything he knew. Was it homesickness for a place that had never been kind? Was it the hunger to build a life where no one cared about the debts of your father or the shame of your uncle? The Viking code of honor was sharp as a blade, and breaking it could make you a permanent outcast. A man who failed to avenge his kin might rather vanish than live as a coward. So many men might have felt their only chance was to slip away to where no one could measure them against impossible standards. Historians still debate how much these breakaway Vikings influenced local politics wherever they settled. Some became powerful lords in their adopted homes, while others stayed small-time traders or craftsmen, weaving Norse skills into a brand new culture. Their legacy is woven through pottery styles, burial practices, even place names across half of Europe. It's a migration wrapped in myth, hard to pin down, but impossible to ignore.
There's a raw courage in abandoning everything, even if the sagas would call it cowardice. To leave behind the oaths, the blood debts, the unending fights over honor, to walk into the unknown, risking being nothing at all. Maybe that is braver than raising a sword, and yet you can feel the sadness in those stories, a permanent ache around the edges. Because once you leave the fjords, you lose the songs that remember your name, and in a culture that worshipped reputation, that might be the worst death of all. You pause on a ridge, looking out over distant fields, imagining one of those lost Vikings kneeling to plant barley far from the icy north, teaching his children to speak a new language, singing lullabies with no mention of Odin or Thor. It's both tragic and hopeful, a kind of survival, even if it cost your place in the sagas. The world was bigger than the village storyteller could ever grasp, and these men proved it. You exhale, the wind tugging at your cloak, and feel the deep hush of the land, as if listening to ghosts who once chose to vanish, never to cross their home threshold again. Their story is woven into the forgotten corners of medieval Europe. Their names faded, but their footprints still pressed into the earth. You wonder if their descendants know, somewhere in their bones, that they come from a runaway Viking, a soul too wild to turn back. The trail bends, carrying you onward, reminding you that leaving is its own legend, even if no one tells it around the hearth anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth remembering. A pale sun struggles through thin clouds as you keep walking, letting your mind trace the path of those Vikings who stayed gone forever, swallowed by distant worlds. Picture one of them building a second life in the east, where silk flowed through the hands of traders like water, or deep in Ireland's tangled woods, where Norse longhouses rose beside Gaelic huts. There, the rhythms of life changed. New harvest rituals, new festivals, new songs. You'd have to learn fast or starve. These lost Vikings adapted, or they vanished into the dirt. Their stories echo through archaeological finds, though no name marks their bones. You might see a grave with a Norse brooch beside a local bead, or a ship rivet buried among farming tools. Tiny clues that someone came, stayed, and never went back. Historians still argue whether these people melted fully into foreign communities or tried to keep tiny Norse enclaves alive for generations. Either way, their sagas turned into silent whispers of trade, marriage, and compromise. One mainstream fact you might not expect is that the farthest traveling Norse settlers sometimes held their own assemblies, their own things, even on new soil. Imagine holding a Viking-style court under olive trees, judging disputes in a language half Scandinavian, half local. Quirky, right? But it shows how much they tried to balance holding on to their heritage while also becoming part of their new world. It's like wearing your grandmother's wedding ring while you marry into a new family. Tradition in one hand, fresh start in the other. A particularly odd tidbit from the sagas claims that one Viking exile in the East was so fond of fermented mare's milk that he insisted on making it every year, even though local people thought it was downright disgusting. That's one way to hold on to your culture, sure. Though you wonder if his neighbors ever dared to share a cup. You'd probably pass, just to stay on the safe side of your stomach. Walking through a clutch of alder trees, you wonder how these wanderers kept up their sense of self when everything around them was strange. 1 year in a new land might change your diet, your accent, even your posture. After 5 years, 10, you'd practically be a new person. And that raises a deeper question. Were these Vikings still Vikings at all, or had they transformed beyond the horizon of their own identity? Historians still debate that, of course. At what point does an immigrant stop being a Viking and start being just another local? That question tugs at you, pulling you deeper into the mystery. Because if they lost their gods, their language, their songs, were they truly still Norse? Maybe all that was left was some hard-learned courage and a few half-remembered proverbs about axes and honor. You'd hope at least they kept their jokes, because you can't imagine telling stories around the fire without a bit of sarcasm. Remember the time someone forgot crocodile dung sunscreen? Exactly. You never fully leave behind your sense of humor. You push on, stepping over a shallow stream, imagining how a lost Viking might have felt hearing a new tongue for the first time, trying to barter for bread, pointing and miming like a child. It must have been humbling, maybe even humiliating. And yet somehow they did it, generation after generation. They blended, survived, loved, raised children, and left traces in the DNA of places that once barely knew their name. And those children? Born with one foot in the old world and one in the new, they might never have even seen the fjords of their father's childhood. They'd grow up thinking of the Norse as half-legendary, half-comic book hero, trying to piece together what was true and what was myth. Some scholars say that's exactly how memory works. Truth fades, story grows, until all that's left is a shimmering half-belief that warms your heart more than cold facts ever could. You crest a small hill, gazing across rolling farmland that might have been tended by one of these half-forgotten Norsemen, and you think about how their tale is both tragic and hopeful. To leave everything behind is an act of wild courage, but also one of loss. The sagas don't celebrate them the way they do bold warriors who died with blades drawn, yet maybe they should. Because it takes a different kind of bravery to put down your sword, lift up a plow, and carve out a second life where no one speaks your name. A breeze ruffles your cloak, and you smile a little, thinking of the irony. These vanished Vikings might have shaped history more than the ones whose bones rest under famous burial mounds. Trade routes, alliances, new families, a new blend of cultures. None of it could have happened without men and women willing to wander, willing to stay, willing to become something unrecognizable to the people they left behind. The path curves downhill, and you follow it, feeling lighter for the realization. Maybe there is a lesson in all this, that leaving, blending, adapting is as heroic as raiding, conquering, ruling. The world is built by people who dared to move, even if no skald ever sang their praises. The silent courage of these forgotten Vikings deserves a place in our imaginations too. You pause by an old oak, letting the hush settle around you, breathing in the scent of damp earth, grateful that some part of their story still glimmers in the corners of history. Because a tale half told is still worth telling, and you're here to carry it forward.
You wander on, tracing the phantom steps of these Vikings who, whether by choice or by force, never returned to the fjords of their youth. Their footprints blur across history, but their impact ripples on, just like a stone tossed into deep water. Some of them became so entangled in local politics that they rose to incredible heights. Think Viking chieftains rebranded as lords in Ireland, or Norse warriors made royal guards in the glittering courts of Constantinople. You can almost see one of them, hammer-shaped pendant hidden beneath embroidered silks, bowing stiffly to a foreign emperor while secretly missing the salty sting of the northern wind. It sounds like a fairy tale, but one mainstream fact is that Vikings really did serve as mercenaries, or Varangian guards, across the Byzantine Empire. Their reputation for fierce loyalty, and equally fierce violence, made them perfect hired swords. Historians still argue whether they kept their old customs alive behind palace walls or traded them away for gold and glory. There's no runestone spelling out the answer, only hints in battered shields and foreign coinage. A particularly quirky tidbit about these Varangians. Apparently, they like to carve their names and a few choice insults into the marble banisters of the Hagia Sophia. Think of it as medieval graffiti, Viking style. Haldor was here, scratched into one of the most sacred buildings in Christendom. If that doesn't make you grin, nothing will. You wonder how the priest felt about a half-drunk Norseman memorializing his presence like a love-struck teenager tagging the high school bathroom. You wander through your own imagined palace corridor, picturing these rugged northerners with their fur-lined cloaks mixing awkwardly with silken-robed courtiers, their rough laughter echoing off mosaics of gold and colored glass. It must have felt like living in a fever dream, part myth, part marvel, part homesickness that no amount of coins could cure. And still they stayed. Some had no way back. Others simply grew roots too deep to pull up again. The stories of these men, and the rare women, get lost behind the flashy legends of raids and ships. But they deserve their spotlight too. Maybe there's a lesson here about how migration works, how ambition can twist you so far from home that one day you wake up and realize you couldn't find your homeland on a map if you tried. A Norse warrior once joked in a saga that even the ravens forgot his name because he'd been gone so long. That might be funny, but it's also heartbreakingly true. As you pass a patch of scrawny birches, you think of the next generation, the children born of Viking mercenaries and local women who grew up in hallways of marble instead of timber, whose lullabies blended Norse rhythms with foreign languages. Imagine the confusion and the wonder of their identity. They probably grew up hearing tales of northern storms they had never felt on their own skin, learning half-forgotten words for snow, for whale, for pine. Historians still debate whether these children were accepted in either culture or fell between worlds, never quite at home anywhere. That idea of not belonging anywhere gnaws at you as you follow the trail, because it's so deeply human, isn't it? To yearn for roots while also reaching out for the wider world. These Vikings who never came home are mirrors of ourselves 1,000 years ago. They remind you that the cost of adventure is often paid in memory, in the slow erosion of identity, until you can barely remember what songs you used to sing before you left. Still, you get the sense that a part of them didn't mind. They were survivors after all, able to bend to any wind, even if it blew them far from the sea. You pause, picturing one of those Varangians on night watch, gazing up at a foreign sky, whispering an old prayer to Thor in a language that no one else in the Empire could understand. There's something achingly beautiful about that, how the smallest rituals survive when everything else is gone. Maybe he tucked a scrap of birch bark in his belt, or carried a runestone in his pocket, a secret bridge to the homeland he would never see again. That echo of memory feels powerful, even comforting. The Vikings who never came home, who let their stories bleed into the soil of distant countries, left behind more than scars and children. They left behind a stubborn hope that you can start over, even when the odds seem impossible, and that, more than their axes or their ships, is their true legacy. You climb a final ridge, letting the view expand before you, hills rolling like soft waves, a distant line of mist blurring where the land ends and the sky begins. It's not so different from what a homesick Varangian might have seen, far from Scandinavia, trying to tell his heart that this too could feel like home someday. And if you squint, you can almost see him, standing there, framed against the sunrise, breathing in courage, holding a borrowed sword, and praying to a god who might or might not be listening. You step forward, carrying his memory with you, letting the quiet of the moment wrap you like a warm cloak. Because somewhere in your own mind, the road always leads back, even if your feet never do. You wander farther, letting your imagination ride alongside the ghosts of those Vikings who set out for glory, for trade, or for war, and simply vanished into new lives. Some may have been lost at sea, never even making it to their destinations, their bones claimed by the cold, unforgiving waves. Others, though, found strange new shores and decided never to look back. The lands they once raided became lands they farmed. The people they once fought became in-laws and neighbors. You picture the hard calluses on their palms shifting from sword hilts to plow handles, a quiet surrender to a life far more ordinary than they ever expected. Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel through forests and fields, drift through riverside settlements and coastal ruins to look for the Vikings who never came home, the warriors and settlers whose stories got buried under layers of time, but who left a mark on history anyway. You can almost taste the salt air even if they never smelled it again, and feel the pull of a home that became only a memory. And let's be real, if you were a Viking with half a chance of glory abroad, you probably wouldn't survive this era's politics either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love if you dropped your location and your local time down below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through the echoes of these stories, letting the details drift across your mind. One mainstream historical fact stands out. The Scandinavian diaspora left traces in everything from English place names to Irish DNA. Viking blood runs through millions of people even today, a living testament to how many never went home. Historians still argue whether these settlers preserved their identities completely, or if they blended so much with locals that the only Viking left was a distant echo of an ancestor's name. It's a debate that never fully ends, shifting with each new archaeological find. One of the more delightfully weird details about these long-gone Norse. There's an old tale of a group who built their own mini thing, a public assembly, in the middle of rural Ireland, complete with law speakers and imported rune stones, as if they were determined to carry a little piece of Scandinavia wherever they landed. Can you picture it? Vikings in woolen cloaks debating farm boundaries on a rainy Irish hill, one of them probably grumbling that the fish still taste wrong. That tiny parliament, historians believe, was a stubborn protest against losing themselves entirely. You follow a trail that seems to waver under your feet, soft and shifting, like the boundary between who you were and who you might become. It's not hard to understand why so many Vikings never went home. Sometimes the land was better, the harvest more reliable, the people kinder or at least easier to deal with than clan feuds and endless blood debt. Other times they were simply stranded by fate, shipwrecked, wounded, or too deep in local alliances to ever break free again. Still, the memory of the North burned in their bones. You can almost hear them telling half-remembered stories by smoky hearths, the old language clinging to their tongues, kids staring wide-eyed at tales of ice and fire. The second you pause to listen, you feel how that same ache of wanting to belong while never fully belonging still echoes through you, across centuries. That's the quiet tragedy of those who never returned. They became part of something else, but also lost a part of themselves forever. Historians still argue whether those final settlements counted as true Viking communities or merely fading outposts. Archaeology digs up beads, swords, and scales, enough to see their presence, but not always enough to reconstruct their full lives. Did they dream of home at night, you wonder? Did they teach their children old lullabies, or did those too slip away over time? You find yourself hoping they at least kept one or two, passing them down like flickering candles in the dark. You picture a last group, a small band of traders who made it to what is now Russia, where river routes carried them to places beyond imagining. Some would join local armies, others become merchants with roots too deep to pull up again. Their legacy formed the first pages of the Russian state, a strange gift from Vikings who might never have seen their own fjords again. That twist of fate feels almost mythic, doesn't it? Like the gods themselves wanted to scatter them across the earth. As you settle on a mossy rock, letting your heart beat steady, you think about how so many of these Vikings, warriors, farmers, dreamers, stepped off ships thinking they'd return, only to find themselves rewriting their entire destiny. Maybe you felt that too in some small way. A plan that goes off the rails, leaving you stranded but growing into someone new, somewhere unexpected. They were not so different from us. Their choices, their sacrifices, and their losses carved out a story as human as any today. Your eyes close, the world going soft and dark behind your eyelids. You can almost hear the wind across a foreign field, where a Norse grave marker leans crooked, its runes softened by time, a name half lost to weather but never entirely erased. That stone stands for all of them, a monument to the Vikings who never came home, who tried to carry a piece of the North into new lands, who became part of the world instead of just raiders upon it. As you breathe in the quiet, remember them. Remember that no adventure is free of cost, and no one travels so far without leaving something behind. The past sleeps, but it waits patiently in old stones, in songs, in your own heartbeat. Someday someone will speak these names again, and for a moment, those lost travelers will walk among us once more. Now, let yourself rest. There's nothing more you must do tonight. You are safe, and so are their stories. The road will still be there in the morning, and so will the memory of the North. Sweet dreams, traveler.